business team. Well, let me recap our Twitter poll question before we get into a conversation with Dr. Ekuru Aukot. Today we're asking you, do you think the opposition is doing enough towards challenging the 16% value-added tax proposal on petroleum products? Well, you can engage with us at KTN News. You can tweet me at Agina Abi. Remember to use the hashtag KTN Business. Well, let's now get straight into that conversation on the cost of living. And of course, we shall be picking Dr. Ekuru Aukot's mind on the legal implications this might have, especially if there's a need to reverse this. Let's now take you to our city center studios where Dr. Ekuru Aukot is standing by to just give us his views. And very good afternoon, Daktari. Thank you for joining us on KTN Business. Perhaps from your reading of this, how will the value-added tax affect Kenyans at the end of the day?
Thanks, Agina. First of all, let's put this into context. As a political party, we have so far submitted 2 memoranda to National Assembly. The first one was in April 29th, where we actually opposed the introduction of the amendments to the VAT Act then, because it was actually going to tax exempt certain goods, product like LPG gas, maize flour, processed milk, and all that. These are consumables that people actually, Kenyans consume on an everyday basis. Number 2 is that Kenyans must understand that VAT is actually a consumption tax. And therefore, to tax exempt it will definitely mean that the cost of living will go high. Now, it's even going to become more tougher for Kenyans the moment they again introduce taxation, VAT, on all petroleum products. This already means that the government, by introducing this tax, will be shielding the manufacturers, but will impose that tax on the ordinary Kenyans. So these are consumer goods that Kenyans need every other day. So the direct impact of this law will mean that the cost of living will go high. And I think also the sad thing to note, again, is that government is obviously playing politics with this law against Kenyans, because if you remember, this is a law that supposed to have been implemented in 2016. But of course, because of political expediency, because the government was looking into re-election in 2017, it actually suspended its implementation. And now that it has been re-elected, they are in government, I guess they don't care anymore about the pain of the ordinary Kenyan. You can imagine goods such as, for example, just farm produce, transportation to the urban areas, Nairobi, Mombasa, the big cities. That means petroleum, people use petroleum for production, manufacturers and all that, fuel and all that. That means it will go high, the cost of living will go high, because then now the producers of those goods will have to charge 16% to us, people who will buy those goods wherever we may be. So that absolutely means that we can no longer save any money. Our purchasing power will go low. We can't therefore invest. We can't afford, things like school fees, Medicare, just even shopping will be a problem. So the impact is that it will make Kenya's lives more miserable, very costly, very high, and eventually it will turn Kenya into an undesirable investment destination, because no investor will want to come to a country where producers is tax exempt, and that the market will shrink. Because remember, VAT is only paid by a very tiny minority of people in this country, not everybody. We are talking about a country that is has got a very high unemployment rate, which I think currently is almost at 69 or 70%. So which means there is no market. And you see, if you increase taxes, then people will not, no manufacturer will invest in a country where there is no market. A market is not the size of the population of people. It's about people's purchasing power. It's about their possibility to be able to buy goods, to be able to spend. So if they are not able to spend, it's about a country where there are job opportunities, there is industrialization. So you can see, even with the so-called Big Four agenda of President Uhuru and the Jubilee government, they will suffer, because who will want to industrialize in a country where taxes are very high for the consumers? Nobody would. And that really is
Let me jump in, Daktari. And still staying with your point, of course, it's clear that you are opposed to the proposal to have this value-added tax. But what are the legal recourse that we can consider in relation to this? Because at the end of the day, the government has maintained that they need to collect taxes to fund the development plan of the country.
Like I said, even before we go to the legal recourse, VAT cannot be the only means government can use to collect taxes. Like I said, it's a small bracket of Kenyans who can actually afford a value-added tax, because it's about a consumer economy. We are largely a consumer economy. We are not producing enough. That's why we are talking about a very high unemployment rate. We are not industrializing. So if government really wanted to collect more taxes, then they need to widen the tax base. You know, and if you recall, last year when we were on the campaign trail, we had proposed actually that to widen our tax base, we need to even abolish VAT and introduce what's called sales tax at 3%, as we had proposed. Because then sales tax at 3% means that you're already targeting a 100 billion economy. I don't think I remember the figures correctly. That means we widen the tax base, and that way you're able to collect. VAT is discouraging to many people. Like I said, today, maize flour, LPG, processed milk, the manufacturer will not be able to claim those taxes from the government. So they will kill their VAT departments. Instead, it will be you and me, Abby, who will now bear that cost. So, in terms of recourse, this is what the government can do. Number one, because this is an administrative action from government, the same way they postponed this 2016 implementation of 2016, they can postpone it again. And secondly, of course, there's legal recourse. People must go to court, and we will also be considering this as a political party. If you're going to affect people's rights, human rights, for example, the right to food, and all those basic things, then it means you're actually offending the Constitution. So this law can indeed be challenged in a court of law to the extent of its constitutionality. All right.
And Daktari, of course, over and above this particular move by the national government towards improving tax collection, the bigger question is the official opposition has been rather silent on this matter. Perhaps what do you think needs to happen in terms of the conversations that the opposition should be advancing?
Well, Abby, that's not entirely true. We, as an opposition party, we've not been silent. We have just shown you that we were the first one way back in April when this was introduced in Parliament. We actually sent a memorandum to our members of Parliament. We suggested to them that they should reject this law, and we gave a lot of reasons. I believe you've also received our memoranda. And we are also, just last week again, when there's a proposal for this introduction of VAT on petroleum products, again, we spoke very eloquently on this. I mean, we've all along actually engaged Parliament on important national issues. We have not been silent. I guess the other opposition you're referring to are those who have already joined the government. So actually, you cannot describe them as opposition. And I think, like we said, even last year, upon conceding defeat to President Uhuru, that we will continue playing our opposition role. And we have done that in a number of important national public issues, right from, challenging the appointment of the cabinet, our proposal to the national budget, what the national budget should take into account, our proposal on how to fight corruption. And one thing that I'm happy about in terms of our contribution, Abby, is that we are the only political party last year that ran a thematic campaign. And related to the subject of our discussion is we clearly adopted the language that corruption is theft of public money. And I'm so happy today it's becoming the lingua. You've even had the president call it a theft of public money, parliamentarians. So opposition, from a Third Way Alliance perspective, has not been silent. We've spoken so loudly, so eloquently on issues of that matter. Even yesterday, you must have seen our letter about building bridges. We are not opposed, for example, to the idea of a handshake. In fact, we encourage President Uhuru to shake as many hands as possible of the politicians. But if you are going to create other institutions like, say, the Building Bridges Task Force, which will now hit again into the money that we do not have, at the time when we have constitutional bodies like NCIC, East Africa, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, DCI, or the Office of DPP, that really ought to be strengthened or encouraged to go after thieves of public money. It's defeatist, and that's why we are saying, even as you introduce these VAT acts, you're able to, to be able to raise more taxes, but you are also being wasteful. We are not using our resources in the most prudent way, and we have contextualized that in the way in which the Building Bridges Task Force was created. It's going to eat into already money we do not have. It's duplicating functions of constitutional bodies. If you look at the TLRs, and our proposal is very simple. Instead of spending money we do not have, Abby, there are already a lot of findings on what ails our country. For example, TJRC findings are there, the Constitution of Kenya, the Akumi Commission, the WAKI, the Krigler. Those are things that really ail our country today. So let's not spend any more money on a fishing expedition on what we think ails this country. Let's just implement those findings by those very, very existing constitutional bodies so that we save more money, and therefore we are not then able to tax Kenyans through this law. So it's unnecessary. If you are going to raise taxes, overburden the Kenyan, on their cost of living for purposes of throwing away money, it doesn't make sense. And that's why we are saying this law will make the cost of living in Kenya very high, and we are urging government to prudently use the resources we already have by, for example, even rejecting, degazetting and abolishing entities like, building bridges, and so that Kenyans don't have to bear this unnecessary cost.
All right, Daktari, let's pause the conversation for now, but when we come back to you, we just want to push the conversation around the fight against corruption. Of course, it has taken a focal point in the country, but we'll be getting your thoughts in a short while as we take some other stories now from the business world. And moving on to some other stories. Actually, before we proceed with other stories, let's go for a quick commercial break. We still have much more coming up.